Hello there. Welcome to this episode of Just a Few. My name is Patrick Antwine, and I have the privilege through this platform to respond biblically to questions submitted by people like yourself. If you have a question and maybe you'd like me to provide you with a response, please use the email address on the screen, submit the question via email, and I'll try to provide you with a response as soon as I can. Let's go to today's question. The question has to do with how the Bible presents the resurrection, the death and resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ. It's a question that is associated with Easter, and let's look at the question. It says, if Jesus died on Friday and was resurrected on Sunday, how could that be 3 days? And maybe you've have someone ask you that question before, or even you yourself as a Christian might have been wondering that, and you just left it alone because you felt, well, there must be some explanation. It's a very good question, and we need to, the first part of my response is this. As readers of the Bible, when we approach the Bible, one of the mistakes we are prone to make is that we assume that the writers of the scriptures were modern day Western scientific thinking writers. Remember, they lived in a different culture, they lived in a different age, they expressed themselves differently. So we cannot be holding them to a standard that we would hold modern day writers and think, why didn't they express themselves the way people express themselves in our modern culture? That's unfair. Let's see how they express themselves and accept it. That's how their writings were, and try to understand from interpreting other passages, what did they mean? Having said that as a foundation, let's look at what the New Testament says about Jesus's death and resurrection. Let me start in the Gospels. Let's look at Matthew. Matthew chapter 20, verses 18 and 19 says, Jesus was speaking to his disciples, behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be betrayed to the chief priests and to the scribes, and they will condemn him to death. Verse 19 says, and deliver him to the Gentiles to mock and to scourge and to crucify, and the third day he will rise again. That's how Matthew presents what Jesus said. In the Gospel according to Mark now, chapter 8, verse 31 says, and he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. So now there's another expression. The first one was the third day he will rise again. Now we see after 3 days. Same Gospel according to Mark chapter 9, verse 31 now. For he taught his disciples and said to them, the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And after he is killed, he will rise the third day. So here Mark is saying, with the same Mark, in the previous chapter, he quotes Jesus as saying, after 3 days. Now in this chapter, quotes Jesus as saying, the third day. Which is it? Go back to Matthew chapter 27. This is now after the resurrection, after the death of Jesus, and the religious leaders are trying to get permission to seal and protect the tomb, lest what Jesus was claiming would, the disciples would concoct some theory that by stealing his body and claiming he rose from the dead. So that's what the religious leaders were trying to prevent. Matthew chapter 27, verses 63 and 64, this is what they were saying. They said, Sir, going to Pilate, we remember that when he was still alive, how that deceiver, referring to Jesus, said, after 3 days I will rise. So this is what they're saying, that they're quoting, and they're saying Jesus had said, after 3 days I will rise. Verse 64, therefore command that the tomb be made secure until the third day. Why not until after 3 days? They're using the term, it would seem, interchangeably. Lest his disciples come by night and steal away his body, and so on. So they use both terms there. They said, Jesus said, after 3 days he will rise. So therefore, provide a guard and seal the tomb until the third day. Listen to how the Apostle Paul now, in his epistle to the Corinthians, refers to the gospel. Verse 3, And verse 4, 1 Corinthians 15. For I delivered to you, first of all, that which I also received, that Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he rose again the third day according to the scriptures. Paul the apostle uses the expression the third day. That is when Jesus rose. So when you read this now, you realize sometimes they use the expression after 3 days, and sometimes they use the term the third day. This is the way the ancient peoples in that culture wrote, and we need to understand why they wrote that way and what they meant. Even long before the Gospels, even long before Jesus came on the scene, if you go back to 2 Chronicles, and I'm only going to use one reference or one passage from the Old Testament to show you, even Old Testament writers use the term interchangeably, so the Bible is consistent. 2 Chronicles chapter 10, verse 5. Solomon is dead, his son Rehoboam is about to assume the throne he has, and there's a split in the kingdom. Another guy named Jeroboam is offering to make some form of reconciliation with Rehoboam because Jeroboam had a rift with Solomon when Solomon was alive. And there was this split between the elders and the younger people. Whom should Rehoboam listen to? And he told them, go back and give me a chance to decide if I should take your advice as elders or take the advice of my friends. 2 Chronicles 10 verse 5. So Rehoboam said to them, come back to me after 3 days. And the people departed. And look at what happened when they came back. So Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam on the third day, as the king had directed. I thought he said after 3 days. Here the writers say no, they came back because he had directed them to come on the third day. What is it telling us? They used the terms interchangeably. To them, it meant the same thing. So Jeroboam, I'm reading that verse 12 now again. So Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam on the third day, as the king had directed, saying, come back to me the third day. But wait a minute, verse 5 here told them, come back to me after 3 days. There's no conflict there in that culture, in that grammatical expression. It meant the same. And you say, well, how could that be? That's because you're thinking as a Westerner with how we speak here. So then these expressions are what you call colloquialisms, expressions that people in a particular setting use, and they understand exactly what they meant. So in that culture, if events took place and they involve any part of a certain number of days, in this case 3 days, to them it's 3 days. So Jesus died on Friday, that's 1 day. He was in the tomb Saturday and he rose on Sunday. 3 days were involved in those events. So to them, they call that 3 days. It doesn't mean 72 hours. Nowhere in the Bible will you see Jesus will rise again after 72 hours. That's our way of reckoning time and hours and days. They didn't do it that way. So the Bible doesn't say he will rise after 72 hours, which is what you're thinking, that if he died on Friday evening, Saturday evening is 24 hours, Sunday evening is 24, Monday evening is 72, and Tuesday morning probably he rose from the dead. No, that's not the way they reckon time. Any part of the day that is involved in a series of events, you reckon it as a day. And you may say that doesn't make sense. You're just making an excuse for the Bible. Really? Let's look at our culture that we think is so enlightened. When a person does what we call in our culture, let's say a day work. A day in our culture is 24 hours. Does it mean the person works 24 hours? No, the person might work from 7 to 3 or 8 to 4 or 9 to 5. That's just 8 hours. But why do we call it a day work and a day is 24 hours? We see no contradiction there, don't we? Because we understand what we mean when we use that expression, a day work. It doesn't mean 24 hours of work. And when a person gets a week's pay and he said he works for 5 days, 5 days by 24 hours is 120 hours if the math is correct. The person didn't work 120 hours. How could you say he worked 5 days? No, you meant that he worked a part or what was required on each of 5 days. And we say he worked 5 days. He worked a week. In fact, a week is 7 days, but we say he worked a week. There's no contradiction there, because when we use those expressions, we understand what we mean. So don't be too quick to judge the biblical writers. They were writing the way they spoke and what they understood. In our culture, if you go to a car park and you have to park and you have to pay parking charges, you'll see the sign says so many dollars per hour or part thereof. So if you park for 59 minutes, you are charged for an hour. If you park for 10 minutes, you are charged for an hour. You may say that 10 minutes is not an hour, but we understand what they mean, any part thereof. So if you park there for 61 minutes, you pay for 2 hours. But 61 minutes is not 2 hours. No, 2 hours were involved in the time you spend there, so you have to pay for 2 hours. Same thing with call charges. If you make a call and you're being charged per minute and you talk for 59 seconds or 10 seconds, you pay for a minute. If you speak for 61 or 62 seconds, you pay for 2 minutes. And we understand why they charge us that way. We understand why it's 2 minutes, even though it's not 120 seconds. So I hope that you're understanding how they wrote. It doesn't mean that Jesus will be raised after 72 hours. That's our way of thinking of time of 3 days. It doesn't mean 3 complete days. It means any part thereof of 3 days. Jesus died on Friday, that's the first day. Saturday was the second day, Sunday is the third day. That's why sometimes they use the expression, he will rise on the third day. Sometimes they say 3 days because 3 days were involved, or they sometimes say the third day because Friday is the first day, Saturday is the second day, third day, Sunday is the third day of the events. There's no contradiction there. And that's what those expressions mean. Jesus died on Friday and he rose again on Sunday morning, 3 days or the third day. My name is Patrick Antoine. Hopefully that clears it up a little bit and that you'll see that there is no contradiction. Respect the way the ancient writers wrote. If you have a question, please feel free to submit it to me via the email address on the screen again, and I'll be only too glad to try to provide you with a response if I can. Until then, grace and peace be multiplied to you.